the team at the top of the SEC on paper, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs. Kirby Smart's done an amazing job, continues to replenish great personnel. Yes, they have losses, just like always. The biggest loss probably being Brock Bowers. But how many times have they had losses in the last few years? And yet it's not like the program drops off in any particular spot. Now, last year, I would argue that the front seven defensively has not been up to the standard. But when we evaluate Georgia, the standard is different than that of your average football team. And I think people have a hard time understanding that. It's like, well, Georgia defensive line, not as good. Doesn't mean they're not still great. They're not as good as the 2021 version of the Georgia Bulldogs. Okay, so they are in the category amongst teams that get measured against themselves, not against the rest of the sport, not against the, what's that line they have in baseball? WAR, right? Wins against replacement. They're not being used in the WAR scale. Like, they are being measured against Georgia and the best versions of Georgia. So, yeah, there are aspects of this year's team that might not be as good as the teams that have won national championships or competed for them, but they might be better in some other places, like a quarterback. And I think Carson Beck is the best quarterback that Georgia's had in quite some time. Just an amazing performance last year, almost 4,000 yards, school record, completing 72% of his passes. And if you look too at about how they kind of brought him along last year, he really wasn't asked to do a whole lot in the first 3 or 4 games. And then the Kentucky game happened, and it's like, all right, Carson, we're going to unleash you on the world. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, he got better as the season went along. The intermediate throws, the deep throws, getting the ball up and over defenders. Carson Beck's as talented as almost any quarterback in the sport. There's a reason why when you look at all the mock drafts for 2025, he's up near the top. Whether he's 1, 2, 3, or 4, he's up there in the top 5 almost universally. So their quarterback is back. They do lose a couple key pieces in the backfield. Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton are both gone, but they did bring in one of the better impact players at the position, one of the more versatile players at the position in the country, in Trevor Etienne from Florida. Now, there, he had to kind of split carries with Montrell Johnson, but Etienne, extremely dynamic out of the backfield as a pass catcher, and should be spelled alongside Branson Robinson, who was hurt early in the season last year. They also brought in great recruits, like they always do at almost every position. The offensive line should be super elite, and there shouldn't be a whole lot that you need to be concerned about with what they have offensively. And then we talk about Brock Bowers and the weapons. They're going to be great at wide receiver. I feel great about that position. But Brock Bowers being gone is something that has kind of kept me up. But the more I've talked to people associated with Georgia, the more I continue to hear the name Ben Yurachek from Stanford, who is transferring in at the tight end spot. Now, he was great in the Pac-12 last year. He was great out there on the West Coast, very productive on on an offense and a team, frankly, that wasn't very good. I continue to hear his name as a guy that might be a difference maker. So remember that name, tight end Benjamin Yurachek. All right, keep an eye on that name. Defensively, yeah, they lose some really quality pieces in the back end. In the first 90 picks, they had Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard, and Tyke Smith. All got drafted. All will likely be good NFL players. But the front seven, they return for the most part intact. Feel good about their group. Yeah, they lose Jamin Dumas Johnson, lose a couple other guys. They're going to be all right in the front seven with returnees. Here's the problem. 2023 rushing defense statistics. Okay? Remember, we are not comparing Georgia to your average FBS football team. I am comparing Georgia, to the best versions of Georgia. Okay? If you can't stop the run in the SEC, you're going to have some issues. In 2023, they were 20th in the sport against the run. They gave up 114 yards per game. That was probably inflated with a couple performances. The Bama game, the Georgia Tech game, the Missouri game. They got gashed on the ground. They were 37th in yards per carry given up. They also had 8% negative play rate. That was 66th in the country. So they weren't creating a lot of disruption. They weren't having as many tackles for loss as maybe they've had in the past. They also gave up a decent amount of explosive runs. So when I think Georgia, and I think front seven defensively, where they were when they were winning national championships just a couple years ago, I never saw them allowing 115 yards a game on the ground. It was probably closer to 70 than it was 120. So that has to be an area that gets addressed. So if there's one thing that would keep me up at night if I were Kirby Smart, it'd be the front seven defensively, but I do think they should improve at that spot. The other thing that would keep me up would be the schedule. You have 6 home games, you got 2 neutral sites. Okay. Then you have 4 true road games. How about these road games? Okay. Kentucky, perennial bowl team. At Alabama, perennial playoff contender. At Texas, playoff team last year. Likely a playoff contender for the foreseeable future. At Ole Miss. Okay. At Ole Miss, at Texas, at Alabama, and at Kentucky. And Kentucky, by the way, has played Georgia, with the exception of last year, better than most teams the last few years. So 4 very difficult road games. Then you got 2 neutral sites. Clemson, top 15 team, top 10 program. Florida, not a top 15 team, but traditionally probably a top 10 to 15 program. In some years better than that. Then you get Tennessee at home. So it's a very, very difficult schedule. Extremely difficult schedule. One that I think they can navigate, but I'm not sure they'll be able to navigate it unscathed. However, they're still, by far and away, tier 1 status in the SEC.